Hello guys, and welcome back to the next live interview on the Warrior Academy podcast. We are live streaming this to our YouTube groups and our Facebook groups across Dubai and the UK. I'm here today with Obi James. Obi James is a certified relationship coach, mediator, and culture change consultant who specializes in transforming relationships. Obi, you've been featured in Psychology Magazine and you're a speaker and panelist on culture. Obi's here today to speak with us about the importance of prioritizing healthy and empowered relationships, particularly as parents. Obi, how are you?
Very well, thank you, Seb. I'm happy to be here.
Amazing, great to have you on. Thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome.
So tell us a little bit about Obi. Who is Obi? What's your background and got you to what you're doing right now?
So I have a very interesting background. People are always very curious about my background. I was born in Germany to a Finnish mother and a Nigerian father. So they both went to medical school in Germany, and I spent my young childhood years in Germany, and then moved to Nigeria, where they ran a hospital for over 30 years. I moved to Finland as a teenager and spent my teenage years in Finland, and have now been in the UK for 20 plus years.
Wow. Okay, cool. So 20 plus years. And in your 20 years in the UK, can you tell us a little bit about what you've been up to?
So I studied I studied physiology with quite a lot of neuroscience at university. I went to University College London, and I went into banking when I graduated, as you do, not. And I worked initially as a recruiter for various banks, Lloyds, Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, and then went into development, really developed a keen interest in people development. And from there, have just become really passionate about relationships. So I specialized in relationship coaching a few years ago, and I've been doing relationship work across various organizations, but also with some private clients in the last few years.
Okay, wow, really interesting. So in terms of getting into, focusing on relationships, what was your big why behind that? What sort of makes you so passionate about that subject?
I guess we're always in relationship, right? Everything we do is in relationship with self as a starting point, always as a starting point, and then relationship with other, and that really impacts our fulfillment in life. The relationships we have at work, at home, and in our communities. I would say that the big interest, actually, when I left banking to set up my own coaching and consultancy practice, I worked initially on a one-to-one basis with leaders. And what I found was that a lot of the leaders had all these aha moments in terms of getting connected with themselves. And they went back into their workplaces with more vulnerability, more authenticity. And there was a little bit of a struggle because the cultures within the organization just didn't work for them in terms of allowing this new way of being. So that really triggered my interest in relationships and ultimately in the culture within organizations. And I started looking at how can I support these leaders in a way that isn't individual, but actually collectively help shape the way they work with other people.
Wow, amazing. Really, really interesting. And I understand a lot of the insights you've got are to do with parenting and working together as a team, as parents as a team, right?
Yes, so I'm a parent myself. I'm a happily divorced parent. I've got two daughters. I've got a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old. They're actually at their dad's at the moment, which is why I'm having a bit of peace. And I would say as a parent, and also the role that we do in relationship with our partners, whether it's, ex-husbands or husbands or current partners, whatever it might be, or wives. I think it's really key for us how we show up in those relationships and how we influence those relationships. So that's something I've really taken a huge interest in over the years.
Wow, fascinating. So from the perspective of a parent going through this difficult lockdown situation that we're all in, what kind of changes can you see with parenting as a team?
I think that parents who actually, I relate this to what happens in organizations. So when I work with leaders, I specialize in shared leadership. So a lot of the culture change work I do is around helping leaders let go of this traditional view of leadership as being a decision driving, problem solving role, because it's just too heavy. The demands of leadership is huge. And it's the same thing at home. I think as parents, somehow traditionally we take on this leadership role and forget that we also have other leaders, however young, who can have a say in how things are done around the family. So when it comes to parenting, I think that the families that I see, based on some of the coaching sessions I've had with private clients so far, the ones that are really struggling are the ones that are wanting to drive how things are done in the home. And the relationship with the children is so key. And actually a huge aspect of that relationship with the children is relationship with your partner.
Right. Yeah.
Relationships basically circle the whole unit in a lot of ways, and where those are strong and where those are empowered, you do have a very different kind of reaction and mindset around what the lockdown and the experience we're having with the pandemic at the moment.
Right. So from the perspective of a parent who's maybe they're struggling. Maybe we've got parents watching this who are struggling. Prior to the lockdown, maybe things were fine. And now they're in a situation where maybe they're arguing more, maybe there's more conflict going on, because we've all got all these different pressures, right? There's a lot of pressure coming at us from every different angle during this lockdown, socially, economically, from a health perspective, everything, right? Yeah. What sort of practical tips can you give to parents who are watching, which would help them kind of build their relationships through this, not in spite of this, but because of this, and kind of build a deeper connection with each other, and yeah, I guess parent as a team better.
I would say so. I've spoken to a lot of parents since the pandemic. I probably spend a larger part of my days I'm spending at the moment working with some individuals and some partnerships that are really struggling. And my first tip would be, first of all, to normalize that these are not normal times, and with that comes a different level of pressure. Traditionally, we have places we can go to. We have places of escapism. So we can go to the gym, we can get to work, we can go out and see some friends, and we can sort of diffuse a little bit when we feel triggered. Unfortunately, because of the lockdown and the current situation, a lot is rising to the surface in families and in relationships. It's the same as what's happening in the workplace. And what's rising in the surface is things that people have ignored over the years, or however long the relationship has been going on for. And now we can look at that as a positive, if we're able to see the silver lining, which is that actually we do now have an opportunity to review the relationships we're in and to think about what is the vision we have for a better relationship post the pandemic. So now is the time to start having those discussions, and sometimes they're not easy discussions to have, and they have to be done in a constructive way, which is where I always recommend, when it does get heated, to get a facilitator, to get a relationship coach, to get an ally, someone who's not biased, that can work with your relationship, because it does help to have a third party when things get too hot.
Yeah, definitely. I love that perspective on looking at this and looking at the challenges or difficulties we may be going through right now, almost positively from a relationship perspective, because they're almost like signals, right? It's like a signal of what needs correcting, of what behavior needs correcting, and it's your approach is pretty much constructive criticism. What you're getting right now is feedback, which maybe you didn't ask for, but you're getting it anyway. Of where your relationship's going right or where your relationship's going wrong, and what you can do to improve that. I love that. I think that's really, really powerful.
And I would say that for a lot, the calls I'm getting. So as an example, I've had a few calls of, okay, Obi, you are divorced. Tell me, I need to get divorced today. And I'm like, hang on a second. No, this is not the time to make any huge decisions about your relationship, because these are not a signal of the norm for you. However, it's surfacing things that you need to work on. And I would say that for a lot of relationships, just like people have their careers or teams or cultures, we don't give the attention to the relationships that they need until they get really squeaky. So the squeakiness is coming now and asking for attention, which can be a positive. However, it is not the time to make the decisions around a long-term place to go or vision for your relationship, unless you're doing it in a very constructive forum.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, whenever you're in that kind of emotional state and you're reacting to what's going on around you, you're sort of in the worst possible position to make a decision, right? I mean, taking a step back and reflecting, now's a great time for that.
Yeah, and also, you did ask the question about parents, and I think our role as parents becomes even more critical. I often, say to people that what we say to our children what to do, when we tell them what to do, and what we say to them about how to be or how to behave or how to be in relationship with others is really important. However, it is not as important as what we show them. So we are their biggest role models in terms of what to give in a relationship and what to expect in a relationship. They are constantly watching us. They're constantly taking from us cues that we don't even know we're giving to them. So it's really important to get that unit correct as a team so that you can build the culture that you want in your family, but also you're actually helping your children think about how they're going to be in relationship with other people. It's not an easy task, parenting.
Yeah, completely. I mean, I guess the, everything we're doing as parents is teaching children something, right? And the way in which we relationship, they are learning, right? And it's incredible. And I think, if you watch an unhealthy relationship all the time, and that's where you grow up, it can affect you later in life and almost start to impact the way in which you have and hold and maintain relationships, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, the other thing is that we forget how much children see, even if they don't verbalize it or we don't think they see it. So actually keeping those communication, the communication going with your children is really important, even when things are hard, even if it's, conversations about, yes, mommy and daddy are having a difficult time right now. We can normalize it. I think this feeling of perfectionism or having to portray perfectionism, which is again what we see in the workplace with leaders, can have devastating effects because it can create confusion. And so it's time to bring in more vulnerability to say, yeah, we're all navigating this together as a family. There's no precedent and we're trying to figure it out. And of course, clashes come in. And of course, mommy hasn't behaved, in a very constructive way and apologize. So I think the relationship keeps, the growth is for everyone. Our relationship with our children, our relationship with each other as partners, and the relationship of the family as a unit.
Yeah, completely. I love what you said about, perfect parenting not necessarily being the best thing for your child, right? It can almost create this toxic reality of, this false reality of what to expect. And then I think, your children can grow up to have incredible expectations of their partner, which can be healthy or can be unhealthy, right? And I think giving your children that kind of clear, transparent, insight into what a relationship is. We all make mistakes, but having that ability to apologize, like you said, and to mend and mend bridges quickly and to be transparent as parents, I think that's really powerful. Yeah, really interesting.
And I often say to partnerships and teams that I'm a huge advocate of conflict, and people get really curious about that. And I think that we marginalize conflict a lot, and actually conflict, when it's worked with in a healthy way, can be one of the most empowering aspects of a relationship. Learning how to do it in a healthy way, because that's where you get newness. That's where you uncover new ways, because there's diversity in every relationship. And the beauty of diversity is being able to explore it. You can't explore it without conflict. Some level of conflict. So you have to learn to do that in a healthy way so you get the goodness of the partnership.
Yeah, right. I mean, any time there's friction or conflict, there's potential for growth, right? Because essentially you can look at why that's occurring in the first place, which kind of brings us back to that whole philosophy you've got over this lockdown situation. and you know, when things are coming up, looking at it positively, looking at it as a signal. Really, really interesting. Do you have any sort of examples of parents you've worked with? Obviously, don't say any names, but parents you've worked with who you know have struggled during lockdown, but maybe you've given awareness to, and now they're seeing what's going on around them. These kind of conflicts, not in such a negative light.
Yeah, so some of the parents that I've been speaking to, and some of the parents that I've worked with during this pandemic, and even before that, you know, a good example is, again, going back to that diversity. I tend to work very much with parents that are very different. So, you know, multicultural relationships, or relationships where you have a power professional who's in the workplace and really stressed with work, and you might have a stay-at-home mum. And you know, some of the big examples coming up now in COVID with the conflict people are dealing with is the roles that people play in relationships. So as an example, I've got a parent who's not a stay-at-home mum, but she's the main parent in terms of the day-to-day care of the children, and their relationship has been one where her husband goes to work and is, you know, long hours and very much in the office, and now he's working at home. The roles they've played before the pandemic have really come to the surface in terms of the mismatch, or the imbalance in roles. And the conflict is rising from almost a battle of roles. I need more space than you do because I have this, you know, job that I'm doing, or because I am so tired from having to do all the family stuff and the homeschooling. I mean, don't get me started on homeschooling. So this is where I talk about resetting the relationship, because some of the resentment that people have built up over years in their relationships are coming to the forefront, and it is time to reset and have those conversations about, you know, what am I getting from this role? Is it fulfilling for me? Which part of my role am I tired of that I would need more support with? So the couples I'm speaking to now is very much around roles and the imbalance of responsibilities in the relationship.
Wow, really interesting. Yeah, I mean, so tell us a little bit more about roles within the family. What's the typical sort of, you know, if you're looking at a family and you're looking at a family of maybe 2 parents or 3 kids or something along those lines, how does that balance work? How does that actually look?
So when I talk about roles, I think about the responsibilities of each parent. So I can use myself as an example. In previous relationships, I've taken on this maybe superhuman role because I love getting things done, and maybe that's slightly influenced by my investment banking background. However, it's also not had the vulnerability, and I've not brought enough vulnerability and enough of asking for help like I should have. So I've had to learn that over the years. What that's meant is it's actually disempowered my partners in a way, because what they've not been able to do is then help more, or they make up that I don't need help. So when I think about roles, it's those kind of roles where I am the one who is great at organizing things. I am the one who sorts out all the play dates. I am the one who is responsible for cooking. I'm the one who brings in the money. I'm the one who is in charge of understanding how our finances work. And what happens in a lot of relationships is those roles become assigned to individuals, and they're not fluid anymore. And we need to think about that fluidity. Of course, it's okay for it to be assigned to individuals as long as there is an acknowledgement that they are doing those roles, and there's some celebration and recognition of what you bring to the table. And most importantly, a recognition that when you're not willing to do that anymore, when you're tired of being the one who does the cooking, you can speak up. So that conversation and communication has to keep going on. And that is why it's so important to keep giving attention to the relationship, because sometimes those roles almost become an expectation.
Right.
And that is where the friction can start to come in.
Wow, really interesting. Would you say, from your perspective, that most of the conflict that you see within parents and sort of relationships at the moment comes from the roles that they've got not necessarily being recognized or rewarded?
The roles they got not being recognized and rewarded, and I would say miscommunication.
Right. Yeah.
I speak to, so a process in terms of working with a couple is to get them to do a needs analysis of their relationship individually, and even just getting that initial work through, it's like, oh my goodness, are you in the same relationship? Because if it was me, if I use myself as an example, I make up a lot about what's going on for my partner and why my partner might be doing X, Y, Z, and my partner is doing the same. But we never have that conversation about actually what's going on here and what's the relationship needing. And I think the lockdown is helping to surface some of these misconceptions about what the other person is doing or not doing. And the challenge now is that conversations have to be carried on and doing them in a constructive way. Yeah,
definitely. Okay, so really, really interesting. So, I mean, the first step, would you say, to improve this then? Obviously, it's not. I mean, if you've got issues at home right now and there's conflict and there's tension involved and things are worse maybe now than they were before the lockdown occurred, because they're being brought to the surface and it's becoming more apparent. And if you're just joining us now, guys, essentially what we've been discussing is that during this lockdown, a lot of parents are experiencing tension, conflict within their relationships with each other, and a lot of that's not due to brand new problems, but problems resurfacing that were there before, and now because of the tension, it's coming to the surface. So if a parent's in that situation, your advice is not to make any sudden changes, not to react and make sudden decisions, big decisions based on how they're feeling right now. I know the divorce rates going through the roof right now with lockdown and a lot of people separating and changing and making those big decisions, right? But from your perspective, what is the course of action someone can take to improve their relationship? I know you mentioned communication. Are there certain steps they can take or exercise or activities they can do to kind of bring the family unit together?
I think it's so I always focus very much on self-leadership first. I think it's important for us to think about ourselves in terms of what you bring to the table, because it takes two to make a relationship and it takes two to break a relationship. So there has to be a certain level of ownership of the issue by both parties. In terms of first steps, I would say find, if you can, first of all, think about empathy and compassion, and be aware of your privileges. So your privileges could be that you're the person who is able to communicate what's going on for you, and the other person might not be that person who easily communicates what's going on for them. I think being aware of our privileges helps us to create or feel more compassion and empathy, and get curious about what the other person needs, as opposed to making up that what works for me would work for my partner. So I think going to that compassion and empathy place, if you can, not easy to do when you're in conflict, is important. And also, I would say that thinking about change, as all of us are trying to. I come across people who are always trying to change somebody else. If only he would be like that, I would be this way. If only, I don't know, my ex-husband were this way, we'd still be married. And yes, and more importantly, what role have I played in that relationship? So I think taking some ownership first, I would say, is important. And sometimes it requires doing your own self-work with some support from somebody else. So as a first step, I would say speak to someone who is an ally for your relationship. Now, that's very different to speaking to your friends, because your friends, there's a conflict of interest. There's a conflict of interest in, picking up the phone and having a rant to my sister about a challenge I'm having, because she's more likely to side me because she's heard all about my relationship challenges over the years. My partner might not have had the same benefit. So finding an ally for your relationship that is able to look at the relationship in a way that isn't biased and offer you some support would be helpful. What coaches do is they essentially show you a mirror and say, this is how your relationship is working right now. How is it working for you? And what needs to be different? This is where you are now. It's clearly not working. What's the vision? What's possible? And how do you bridge that gap? But it has to be a two-way thing.
Yeah, definitely. Wow, brilliant advice. Some brilliant steps there that that parents can take if they're going through difficult times, conflict, or tension right now. So yeah, thank you so much for that. For a parent who is divorced, who's a single parent right now, they're going through lockdown. Obviously, there's a couple of challenges. I mean, previously it was hard for parents who were going through lockdown in some countries. I'm not quite sure if it was the case in the UK, but to visit their children, right? If they weren't the ones looking after the children primarily in the home, then going to visit was an issue. What kind of challenges did you see, in terms of the roles and the kind of parenting as a team occur during that situation?
I think there's when it comes to parenting, it's different across different relationships. For a healthy relationship where, obviously I would say where there is an abuse and all that stuff, it's a very different process. Where people have traditionally had shared parenting, I think it's important for single parents to recognize the needs of the children. So the common interest, the common purpose is the children, and actually working with the children to support their needs is very different to thinking about what I want and what's in it for me. So again, going back to asking yourself the question, is this about me or is this about my child? And what does my child want or need right now? Children, especially older children, I would recommend should be part of that conversation. It's their lives, it's their relationship with either parent, and giving them a say in it and empowering them to ask for what they need is so important. So designing that with them is really, really key, I would say. I say I'm happily divorced because I love my me time. For me, it's important that I have time and space to be, me and do the stuff that is for me. And it's important for my children to have time with me and with their dad. That's, all that is important. If I don't have a relationship with myself, that might have an impact on how I react to my kids not being at home. So I think individually, we all need to think about our identity. Is your identity wrapped into parenting? And if it is, then you need to think about what happens when the kids leave home. So another, group of parents that I come across are the empty nesters. If your whole relationship revolves around your children and you haven't given your relationship attention, when they leave home, you're left with what now? So for some people, that's when they start to have this, this opportunity to look at their relationship and actually see who they're in relationship with, sometimes for the first time in years. Again, the pandemic is helping us do that. So I think the pandemic is it's quite exposing in a lot of ways. But I see that as an opportunity. I see that as an opportunity to reset. And at the moment, it's not being given a lot of attention or as much attention as what people are doing with their businesses or resetting within their teams or organizations, communities, and what have you. But actually, this is the time for relationships to have a little bit of a review process and think about who am I in partnership with you, and who am I as a parent, and who are we as a parent? This piece tends to get lost a lot. This me and him versus him and him, or whatever the dynamics of the relationship might be.
Yeah, completely. And I guess for a lot of parents, you spend so many years, especially if you've got older children, you spend so many years, maybe even, I don't know, a lot of younger adults are staying at home even longer these days, aren't they? But I mean, they have to right now. But I mean, you spend 20 to 23, 24 years looking after your children, and they're the full focus of your life for like 2 decades. And so when that suddenly changes and they go off and they're making their own families and doing their own things around the world, suddenly it leaves that, like you said, empty nesters, right? And there's that moment where you kind of have to lean in and get in touch with who you are again, right?
Yeah. And part of that, I think, also comes with the rates. We have to recognize that people grow at different rates. So a lot of times when I find in relationships where things have really broken down irretrievably, you find that one partner might have just grown like at a very speedy rate, and they really rediscovered themselves, or they, some of us got married at very young ages. We didn't even know, who we were, let alone who we were in a relationship or what we wanted out of a relationship. So sometimes what you find is that one person grows and the other person is not growing at the same pace or in the same direction. So you have this growing apart. And I think that waiting till 24 years of parenting or however long it is before children leave home, if they ever leave home nowadays, is taking a huge risk. We take our cars for an MOT regularly. We work with, on our careers, we work on our businesses, and for some reason relationships can be very marginalized in terms of our priorities in life, and that's probably because they don't make the most noise unless they get really noisy.
Yeah, right. It's interesting. I saw a funny quote the other day, and it was along the lines of, instead of spending £10,000 on your marriage or getting married, spend that on a marriage counselor at the very beginning of your relationship to teach you how to communicate with your partner. If the idea of the marriage is to set you up and send you off on this amazing journey together, then spend it on a counselor.
I totally agree. And as parents, we need to be thinking of our relationship with our children as well. My children, we are very there is a level of shared leadership. Of course, as a parent, you're still you're still the decision maker. But where we can, we need to empower them more and make them, give them some rights to make a decision. It could be decisions around what's for breakfast. It could be decisions around, okay, you structure the day. I do this with my kids. Like for half term, each person gets a day when they plan the day, and we go, with their plan. So we're teaching them leadership. We're teaching them responsibility for the family, because it's a shared responsibility, as opposed to creating this telling way of doing things that I drive what needs to be done and when. I think from a very early stage, we need to start thinking of the family as a team, and teams have roles, and teams have, a vision, and teams have ways that they want to do things together.
I think that's such a good idea, especially from a very young age. Teach your children that they've got a voice and they should be heard. And I think the best way to do that is to listen to them, right? Give them the platform from which they can come up with ideas and share their ideas. And I love the way that you encourage leadership development from a young age. And I think by encouraging sharing ideas and sharing the day, like you said, you're almost developing this democratic leadership style within them from a super young age, right?
Well, but if you give them an hour of the day, you plan. So if I think so, I've been doing a lot of work with the NHS and since the pandemic, so I've been incredibly busy, and also homeschooling as a single mum. And we have a team meeting in the mornings at breakfast. We look at, okay, my plan, Mummy's got 3 Zoom calls today. You need to do maths, English. What time would you like to do yours? I don't care what time you do it, as long as you do what you need to do, and I need to do what I need to do. And my older one is really good, because she's finished. She gets everything finished by midday. By the time I come down at lunchtime and we review our work, she's done for the day. She's like, does that mean I have all day? I'm like, it's your day. And the younger one just takes the whole day to finish the same level of work. But again, that works for her. So she's picking up that actually, if she focuses in the morning, she can get stuff done. But I'm not policing them, because first of all, I can't, but also it's not my style of parenting.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Really, really interesting.
So we're all leaders. We're a team.
Yeah, exactly. I'd love to hear how, what impact do you think there is on young people when you develop leadership skills from a young age?
Gosh, I think it has a huge, huge impact. I think it's, again, they are always in relationship. They are, we rescue. We're either problem solving or we're rescuing. Very often as parents, I certainly know that that's my default, and I've had to learn how to do that. So, as an example, when it comes to conflict, I don't get very involved. I hardly, to be honest, get involved when my girls have a tip and they're fighting with each other. My job is to mediate. I'm sort of, okay, what's going on here? Okay, is this working for you guys? Okay, and so I'm very much okay. So what do you think is going on for her, and what do you think is going on for her? And so they've learned to apologize to each other. They've learned to sort out. Like, unless something is really bad, which is hardly ever the case, I don't really get involved. And I think that's part of leadership, because we're constantly developing them for the outside world. I'm not in school with you, so I can't be there to help you when you have a fight with your friend in the playground. So my way of building those leadership skills is to start doing that at home. The same as teacher consultation meetings. When I'm a school governor in my children's school, and when we have these teacher consultation meetings, I'm very much saying, okay, I'm just here to kind of find out how it's going. Daughter A, how do you think it's going? Teacher, how do you think it's going? What would you like more of? What, like, I'm so removed from it, and I have to say it's a very liberating part of parenting for me, that I don't have to stress myself so much to constantly tell them what to do and how, because I'm not going to follow them around for life.
But by being that kind of mediator, problem solver, and stepping back, I suppose it also prevents you from injecting your own ego into the decision-making process, right? You're not coming up with solutions based on, what it is that any ego issues yourself or anything that might be influencing your decision. It's purely stepping back, almost looking at it third person and taking it all in before you kind of guide the conversation slightly, right?
Absolutely, and for parents, I have such huge empathy for parents who haven't traditionally parented that way or haven't experienced that type of parenting. It's really stressful. It's what, again, the same thing I find in teams. When I go into teams in organizations, I'm working with the leaders to say, okay, for this session, you're part of the team. What does this team need? What needs to happen here? And it takes a while to switch from that, okay, I don't have to be the command and control that carries everything. I can actually go on holiday because we're aligned in terms of our vision. So, it's the same thing at home. It's the same thing with our families. So I don't really see relationships as having to be so different at home or in the workplace. I think we need to become more and more inclusive. Because the world we live in now is demanding, that there's a lot to do, and trying to be a superhero it doesn't get you far.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Great insights there. We've talked a lot about parenting as a team. We've talked about parenting a team. We talked about the roles of a family. We've talked about empty nesters and gaining independence as a parent, and also developing leadership, responsibility from a young age. And one of the things I quite like to talk about is there's a lot of single parents, both single mums and single dads, incredibly inspiring, who I've been very inspired by over the years in our clubs, and they're incredibly dedicated to the character development of their children, despite often facing different and difficult challenges. You say you are, how did you say you are? You were, how did you put it? Happily divorced.
Happily divorced, yes.
Happily divorced. So, it'd be quite interesting to hear from your perspective, how does someone go from divorced to happily divorced?
So, first of all, I think it's a mindset around relationships. So I personally don't buy into marriage being a life sentence, right? So I think that relationships end. Ideally, death would do you part. But sometimes it's divorce that does you part. Sometimes a relationship gets to a place where it's run its course, and you just have to accept that it's run its course. And I think the ending of relationships, how we take it, is really important. I didn't have a smooth divorce, don't get me wrong. I had a messy divorce, if anything else, but it was very liberating in a lot of ways, because you learn so much about yourself, however your relationship ends. And it's like with everything else, when you leave a job, taking the time to kind of reassess and review and think about yourself, and actually mourn and grieve what's gone, so that you can move on. I think sometimes, unfortunately, relationships don't get an opportunity to go through that mourning or grieving process, and then you carry things over and it spills over into your life, and it doesn't allow you the space to move on. And I think moving on is a personal, individual thing. It's a decision that you can make. You can decide to move on. A lot is around mindset. I can't change you, but I can change how I show up in my relationship with you, and in that way I can influence the relationship. So I think it's not about trying to change somebody else. It's about thinking about, actually, that's where the self-leadership I talked about earlier comes in. Who do I want to be in this process, and who do I want to be going forward? That's a very personal, individual thing. So when I think about being happily divorced, I think it's a decision and a mindset that lives with self. And we can decide to dwell on stuff and the past, but again, coaching is not very much like that. So I take very much an approach of, this is where we are today. This isn't feeling right. This is where we want to be, or we might not even know what the vision is. How do I bridge the gap? And the focus, rather than dwelling on if only this happened or if only that happened, it doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah, completely. Dwelling on the past rather than focusing on what you can control in this excitement.
You take your lessons from it and use it to guide you in a positive way going forward. So
yeah,
it's a very individual thing. So again, it probably points to what I was saying earlier about relationships, that you can't be in the healthiest relationship ever if you don't have a relationship with yourself. So that self-work is so critical for everyone, whether you're married, divorced, getting married, never married. I think we all need to take the time to think about, who we are and what does fulfillment look like for us individually. Then ideally we meet someone who we can connect with and co-create something that is even more powerful than what we're able to create on our own.
Yeah, totally. I think one of the ways I kind of look at it is, if you want to be in a happy and successful relationship, the best thing is when it's two people who are happy and in their individual state, and then they come together because they just have more fun and more empowering or whatever it is together, right? Rather than seeing it as you need someone to fill a gap or whatever it is. It's I'm completely happy and someone else can be happy, and together we're even happier. So it's a really interesting approach.
I completely agree with you, Seb. I don't think you should ever be in a relationship because you need to be in a relationship. I think there has to be a want, there has to be a desire, there has to be something that makes you want to be in that partnership, and what makes you want to co-create something in partnership with someone. And that, we can't always be happy all the time, right? So I think there needs to be a recognition that parenting is not easy when you go from this, you meet and you fall in love and you travel the world and you do all this stuff together, and then all of a sudden, at some point, you have this huge responsibility of parenting together. That's not easy to navigate.
Yeah, right.
and it is the squeaky wheel. So going back to the squeaky wheel gets the oil. The children are the squeaky wheels. So we need to recognize them. It doesn't mean that they're the only ones that have needs, because the relationship has needs too. But it's when the tires burst, or when it's when things have gone catastrophically wrong, that we start thinking, hang on a second, we need a relationship coach, or we need a counseling or whatever. But actually, it should be part of the journey of a relationship. I had counseling, or my ex-husband and I had counseling before we got married. We had counseling before we had our first child. We had counseling before we got divorced. I mean, it was a huge feature of our relationship. And I genuinely don't think that with coaching or counseling, that our relationship would have been able to go through what it's gone through if we hadn't had some support. So it's normal to ask for help or to need help. There is no relationship that is smooth from start to finish. That's just not possible.
Yeah, completely. Wow, we've managed to cover a lot from perfect parenting and what that actually is to being transparent and authentic, to parenting as a team. We covered the impact of our relationship on our children as a kind of priority, and teaching children how to relationship by the way in which we hold our own relationships. Independence of the parents, roles as a family, empty nesters growing apart. We covered a lot. That was
relationships
amazing.
Have a lot of complexity to them.
We could do a different live on each of those topics, I think.
Very true. Maybe it's a book. Maybe it should be my next book. I'm finishing one.
Maybe, yeah. Well, tell us about your first book. What was your first book?
So I'm actually nearly completed with my book. It's about growing leaders, not followers. So again, it's in the same line of shared leadership. I do a lot of work, as I said, in organizations around leadership, and sometimes the biggest blockers can be the leaders themselves. So again, with parenting is the same. We need to grow leaders, not followers who just follow what we tell them, because that's exhausting.
Very, very aligned with the Warrior Academy ethos. I love it. To grow warrior leaders. That's what we need to do.
Absolutely. I think that's why we connected from the start, Seb. I'm a huge advocate of the work that you do. I think it's that character development that the sooner we can get it in, the better it is. And there isn't enough done in schools in terms of really growing that leadership and helping people, in terms of their relationship with selves and relationship with others. So I think that's, your work is just so needed in the world, and clearly after the pandemic.
It sounds like yours as well. I've learned so much from this talk, so really, really appreciate it, and really appreciate you coming on. This is going to be a Warrior Academy podcast episode, which I think a lot of parents will benefit from. What's the best way for our members to get in touch with you?
LinkedIn is probably where I'm the most active in terms of social media, but I'm across, LinkedIn and Instagram and Twitter, and my email address is, I'm also happy to share my email address, which is obi@obijames.com. So I always get back to people on emails, and thank you very much for having me. I've enjoyed this conversation. Worries. It's given me lots of ideas, and it always does. I love your questions.
There's a lot of them, so guys, thanks guys. If you've got any questions at all, then look for Obi James on LinkedIn, and she can give you some insights. She's got some awesome articles in there as well that you guys can dig into. So any questions at all, look for Obi on LinkedIn. Obi, thank you so much for coming on today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Seb, and I look forward to speaking more.
Take care.
Take care. Keep up the good work. Bye.